Thank you so much for coming. We were last here actually when Ben here was standing for at the by-election in Wellingborough. Of course, a hell of a lot has happened since then, and we might be seeing some major turmoil in British politics. I'm sure that you'd agree that that's what we all want. The way it's going to work tonight is that Ben will say some words, and then after that there'll be the chance of questions from the audience. So very straightforward. I just want to say that the New Culture Forum, as you might know, from the channel, now has a network of some 30 branches across the country, which is extraordinary for an organisation like ours. We get better turnouts than most political parties. That's not saying so much these days, but nevertheless, it has been a remarkable success over the past year, I'm pleased to say. And so I know that many of you would not be part of NCF Locals, but our national organiser, Stephen's here, will maybe say a few words at the very end of our presentation tonight. We are filming it for our channel, but as you can see, it's strategically there so that none of your faces will be seen. So just the backs of heads, because I know that people don't necessarily like that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Ben Habib. He's Deputy Leader of Reform, and has been a great friend as well to the New Culture Forum, actually, over a long period. I'm delighted that he's here with us in the constituency in which he's standing. We will look forward to your questions, but without further ado, because it is rather hot, I would like to introduce to you Ben Habib. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much, Peter, for that kind introduction, and thank you all for giving up a wonderful evening. Perhaps this is summer and it may not last long. So thank you very much for coming in. Now, can I just ask for a show of hands from those of whom, who've listened to me before, who've heard me speak before? So quite a good number of people. Not in person, but you've heard me on the news and whatnot. And not the news, chat shows. Okay, so pretty much everyone. So I'm going to try and keep it short, because I'd like to hear your questions more than reiterate stuff that you may have otherwise already have heard me say. But the New Culture Forum is an incredibly important organisation, and we tend to talk in politics, I talk in politics, about the economy, the democratic deficit, how we're going to address all of that, how we're going to fix the broken economy, how we will protect our constitutional rights, how we might even get rid of this wretched Irish Sea border that our politicians have put in place. But there's something that transcends all of these things, and it is the British culture. By far the most important thing in any society, in any nation state, is a common culture. Indeed, the definition of society requires a dominant culture, as does the definition of a nation state. If you break your economy, you can fix it. If our politicians do stupid things like sign international treaties habitually that are against the British national interest, we can fix that too, because we can terminate those treaties if necessary in breach of those treaties. But if we lose our culture, if Britishness ceases to be, it'll be impossible to get it back. And you would have seen parliamentarians habitually shrug their shoulders and say, we don't want to talk about the culture war thing. And they belittle culture. And they challenge people like me to define what they mean by culture. And if you're a bit soggy at the wicket in your we all know what we mean by British culture. Hands up if you think you know what you mean by British culture. Yeah, everyone knows what we're talking about. it's difficult to define. It ain't easy just to get up and defend what it is, because it's something that imbues us. It's an integral part of our being. But we know it's being challenged, and if we were to lose it, it'll be impossible to get it back. And then fixing the economy, fixing the constitution, our democratic deficit, all the rest of it becomes academic. And you would have heard me say this in the past. The reason I'm in politics is because I think the nation state that is the United Kingdom faces a threat to its existence, as does, in my view, Western civilization, for reasons that aren't clear to me. Not wholly clear. I've tried to rationalize it, but not wholly clear. Political leaders across the democratic, civilized Western world have given up on nation states, given up on the protection of their people, the promotion of their own interests, the promotion of their nation states. And it is a shocking state of being. I was at a hustings last night in North London, Hendon, just north of Hendon Tube Station, for the campaign against anti-Semitism. And I went to that really quite excited at the prospect of defending, the Jewish people who were there, defending their right to be in the United Kingdom and promoting, a genuinely inclusive society. And I was expecting a good reception, but I was on the panel with Tom Tugendhat, who's a One Nation Tory, if you haven't come across him before. He's sort of as wet can be. And a Labour person I only got as far as his first name, I don't even know what his surname is, but he was the deputy, he's the shadow, not deputy, he's the shadow Minister for Policing, and some chap called Lord Purvis from the Liberal Democrats. And none of them understood the damage that was being done to the social and cultural fabric of the United Kingdom as a result of rampant immigration and the policies of DEI that have been put in place to protect and promote these minorities. Can I assume everyone knows what DEI is? And who's in favour of diversity, equality and inclusion? Anyone here in favour of it?
Yes.
Yeah,
If
okay, yeah.
the equity part of that is recognised. Fairness, and that's not what's happening at the moment. There is no fairness.
Yeah.
What's happening in London at the moment is awful about the marches, the pro-Palestinian marches, but the anti-Semitism, it's not fair, and that really sticks.
Yeah. So DEI.
Hang on, no, we'll wait for after Ben's spoken, if we can. Thank you.
So DEI conjures up an image of equality. The words are very comforting, aren't they? Diversity, equality, inclusion. How can you disagree with that? But actually the practice of DEI is the promotion of ethnic minorities, minority religious beliefs, minority sexual preferences, and gender ideology over and above and to the detriment, in my view, of the majority in this country. It is a direct assault on British culture and the British settlement. It's also a direct assault on our economy, by the way, because if you employ people, as we're required to do now, based on the colour of their skin as opposed to the content of their character and the contribution they can make to your organisation, our economy is going to suffer dramatically. But it's a direct assault on our culture. And what was remarkable last night, apart from the fact that no one recognised that this rampant form of immigration, the inability to settle all these different cultures that have come to this country, the pernicious effect of rampant immigration combined with DEI, which celebrates and promotes different cultures in this country, existing and not integrating. We don't practice integration in this country. We don't therefore have a society. We're not going for the societal model of civilization. We're going for some kind of weird concept where lots of different people can believe lots of different things, some and many of them antagonistically to each other. And all three panelists in that room last night just didn't get it. When I talked about immigration and DEI, it was like they hadn't heard anyone from Reform UK ever speak before. And they were dumbfounded. I mean, I was absolutely staggered because I would have thought that at least it would have entered their psyche. But every time I talked about it, Lord Purvis then would interject and say, well, back in the real world, And the real world actually is rampant immigration and the damaging effects of DEI. But the other thing that was quite revelationary last night, and it was a first for me, are there any Jewish people in the audience? So what was really interesting to me last night was that even the Jewish community there, who I would have thought would appreciate how damaging DEI is for them, because when you elevate, now ostensibly the Jewish community should be protected by DEI. They should be one of the minorities who are being promoted. But when you separate the majority, for which I would read everyone in this room, from ethnic minorities, and you promote those ethnic minorities over and above the majority, then it is the ethnic minority within that subgroup that dominates, that is going to dominate everything. Can you see that? That if you are elevated, so there are 4 million, I'm not picking on Islam particularly or Muslims particularly, but there are 4 million Muslims in the United Kingdom. There are 200,000 Jews. If you put them in the same category and you put them on a level playing field, but over and above the rest of the people, then it'll be the 4 million Muslims that dominate the debate. It won't be the 200,000 Jewish people. And so in the promotion, and this is almost a derivative product of DEI, in the promotion of DEI, not only are they damaging the majority's position and the societal fabric in the United Kingdom, they're actually creating the possibility and the probability, and as we've seen, the reality of an attack on smaller minorities who can't keep up with it. And so, and the Jewish people in the room hadn't appreciated that. That was a new thing for them. They thought DEI, especially the younger lot in the audience, thought that DEI would protect them, and it doesn't. And the other thing that was revelationary for me was that they didn't see the rise of Islam as being consistent with the promotion of Gaza versus Israel, the Palestinian marches. For me, I see them as going in lockstep. Islam is on the rise in the United Kingdom. The promotion of Gaza and anti-Israeli sentiment are in lockstep. But what they pointed to in the room last night was that a lot of these people on these marches are white. And of course they are white. And we've seen this rather idiotic situation where you've got lesbians for Gaza and homosexuals for Gaza, or trans people for Gaza. And what I'm coming to terms with, Peter, I'd love your view on it. What I'm beginning to think is that these strange bedfellows, because of course if you're homosexual and you're in Gaza, you're not going to survive for too long. But these strange bedfellows have come together because they're all part of this DEI group, and they're traveling together. The Jews, for some reason, have been left out. I think it's because ideologically they're mainstream with us, but ethnically they're a very, very small minority, so it's easy to pick on them. But these strange bedfellows are traveling together, and you can see them working at the moment because it's convenient to work together. But, we're going to have division in amongst that group, dramatic division in amongst that group, as the social fabric of this country further breaks down. And the other thing we're going to experience, something that Tom Tugendhat, patronizingly, he tried to educate me on Islam last night. He obviously doesn't know that my father is Muslim and I was born in Pakistan and understand a little about Islam. But he was trying to explain to me last night that there would be division within Islam. And that's the other thing we haven't seen in this country, but we will experience. The Middle East and the Near East and North Africa is riven with division in Islam. Islam is not a religion that's settled within itself. It's not comfortable with itself. It's still finding its feet. It's an immature ideology and religion compared to Christianity. Christianity is so mature, it almost has ceased to exist in the United Kingdom, if you know what I'm saying. Certainly the Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't represent Christian views. And Islam is way behind us in that sense. And so what we're seeing is a full-on frontal assault on what it means to be British. And we've discussed this before, Peter, and many of you in the room would have heard me say that this is also manifesting itself in an attack on our language and our history, because if you're promoting all these minorities, what you can't do is have the pesky little Brits actually identifying themselves together in a self-confident, proud way, because that would stand in the way of this multiculturalism that's being promoted. So we have an attack on our language, because if they can hijack our language, then they control the debate. Islamophobia is a very good example. They use the word Islamophobia to shut down discussion about Islam. And the word phobia means an irrational fear. So the minute they say it's irrational to fear Islam, you can't possibly have a debate about it, because it would be irrational to be talking about it. Very clever. They've shut you down before you even got to the starter mark. And they hijack our language, and they hijack our history. And this comes back full swing, and then I'll shut up. 360 degrees to the cultural thing. When people ask me, well, define culture, you can't really do it. What I say is that it is the modern contextual manifestation of our history. And we take our righteousness, our position in modernity from our historical context. What it means to be British means to be part of a culture where Winston Churchill was one of the greatest Britons, where Nelson beat the French in 1805 at sea, and I think there were a couple of skirmishes after that. But then we controlled the high seas pretty much globally until the early 20th century. That was down to Nelson. And these things form our culture. They lead us. The Union flag embodies what it means to be British. We can't necessarily write it all down on a bit of paper in order to justify it to these people, but we know what it means. And the pride in our country comes from our history. And so if they can attack our history, if they can tell us all that we're slave traders, descended from slave traders, Edward Colston never did anything right, his statue deserves to be desecrated, chucked in the Severn, and so on, they've hijacked our ability to identify as being proud and British. And so they take the language, they take our history. And so what Reform UK stands for, and I will really shut up after this, what Reform UK stands for is an unashamed pride in the United Kingdom, the promotion of the nation state that is the United Kingdom, and the promotion of the interests of British citizens. They are the people who elected us. We weren't appointed by some global entity. If we get into Parliament, we would have been elected by the British people, and it is to the British people that everyone in Parliament owes their fiduciary obligation, not to some greater global good, which is effectively how we're being governed at the moment, and you would have heard me speak about that. Reform UK, therefore, is the only change on the ticket, with the exception perhaps of the SDP, forgive me. But we represent a 180-degree change from the settled uniparty that is Labour and the Conservative Party. My son Max, who's at the back of the room, reminded me, he showed me because I obviously hadn't cognizantly clocked it back in 2020, Rishi Sunak holding up a 50p coin, which was minted in 2020, which said diversity built Britain. Yeah. Diversity didn't build Britain. British citizens built Britain, predominantly people, the forefathers of people in this room and my mother's ancestors. So we are under full-scale attack. If you want to save the United Kingdom, really your best bet is Reform UK. Everything else leads to a continued assault on our country. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for that, Ben. Really would like questions from the floor. Can I just say, ladies and gentlemen, please make them questions and not just statements of what you believe. Questions to Ben or even to me if you want. But if you could do that, that would be great. The gentleman there, right there.
Question really for both of you. If the polls are manipulated and Labour gets a huge majority, I think it's going to lead things in this country. I mean, to me, it could be a very dangerous situation if they don't get popular consent for that majority they get.
Yeah, sorry, can I ask you for your first name? You don't have
Paul.
Paul.
Yeah,
So thank you.
I was interested in the talk we were talking to David Starkey. I was been thinking about this, and I listened to that talk, and that's probably his question, really.
Thank you, Paul.
So,
Yeah.
do you want me to have a go at that, or would you?
No, you go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
So, first of all, Labour are getting in anyway. I know that to some Reform supporters that sounds defeatist, but we are on a long march back, and every long march starts with a single step. And if we can get a handful of seats in Parliament, that will be a seismic political event for an insurgent party. I don't think anything like that has happened in history since the Labour Party got its first, 100 years ago, whatever, over 100 years ago. And voting Tory for fear of Labour is to reward the party that has delivered this country into peril. And if you reward if you reward people for bad behaviour, we know this from our children, actually my son's turned out all right.
Did you reward him for bad behaviour?
I probably did. So he's the exception that proves the rule. But if you reward a board of directors for screwing up your company, they're going to go on screwing it up. And so the Tory party has to go. And it's not as if they represent anything different to Labour. Under the Conservative Party, we have all the same problems that we would have with Labour. It's just Labour would do it in a more extreme way. But we've got to start the fight. If you vote Tory, what you're saying is, I want more of what we've already had, and that's got to stop. And there is a chance. By the way, there's no popularity for Labour. No greater popularity for Labour now than there was in 2019. What's happening in the polls is that the polls only measure those people who say they're going to vote. So those people who say they're not going to vote don't even enter the polls. And I think that this is not meant to be self-congratulatory, but if we could get the Reform UK message through to the predominant small c Conservative British citizens right across the country, many of whom would typically vote Labour, if we could get our message out to them, you could see something quite extraordinary happen on the 4th of July. And it may yet happen. One of the great things so Richard Tice and I are pretty good at connecting with Conservative voters. We're not, we're not as good as Nigel is at connecting with people who would otherwise vote Labour. And Nigel coming on the stage will have made a definite impact on Labour voters. You'd agree with that, Peter, wouldn't you? And the polls are behind what's really going on in reality. And what we're feeling, what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, what we're hearing on the streets is there is a dramatic move towards Reform UK. And something extraordinary could happen on the 4th of July.
I think before I take your question, I think one thing's very interesting actually, Ben, is that we've talked a lot about the fact that young people are about as left-wing as they've ever been in this country at the moment, and that's a cause of dismay. However, what was interesting in one poll recently was it showed that actually Reform was just under Labour amongst young people, right? It seems that the rejection is the Tory party as opposed to conservatism. I think that's very, very interesting. 21% of young people were kind of quite taken with Reform. I'm talking about 18 to 24-year-olds.
That's a big deal.
And that is a big deal. That is something that Reform really should look at, I think. Particularly when one can give into despondency about young people monolithically to be on the left. There's a gentleman there, yeah. Yes.
What I'm concerned about at the moment is that there seems to be a lack of getting the message out to a broader demographic.
Can you speak up?
Getting the message out for Reform. I've had no literature, no visits, nothing.
No literature?
I live in Northampton. No
Yeah.
literature. So you have to look up and find out who the candidate is.
Yeah. It won't be the candidate's fault, that would be it would be a head office fault.
There just seems to be a difficulty in actually getting the message out to a wider demographic of people. But obviously there's a huge groundswell. There's a lot of people that are really committed. Probably everybody here is already committed. You know, you're preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
It's trying to find people to convert. That message is not getting out as easy. The mainstream media really restricts this verse.
So yes, I would slightly disagree with you there. My own experience has been that you can tell by the way people talk about it. You can hear when people say, I quite like the sound of this reform. You hear that sort of thing. So I would say that it is getting through, but obviously, you know, you're talking about working behind enemy lines here. That's the problem. So, yeah.
Just to answer one of the statements you did make there.
Yeah.
My daughter and future son-in-law, one works for the NHS, one's a plumber, you know, 18 to 25 demographic. They're going to be voting reform. And that wasn't through any
Wow.
kind of discussion from ourselves.
Yeah.
But maybe a little bit, yeah. But what about actually trying to, you know, target that demographic by Instagram? You know, I've seen things like X.
We are doing that.
Actually, I know reform arts. My feed's full.
Yeah.
Of
And Nigel
you know,
is fantastic on TikTok. He can do stuff that no one else can. He's like the lager that reaches parts that no other lager does.
Yes, gentleman here, yeah.
My name's Ray, by the way, we've met
Yeah,
a number of
of
times.
course, yeah.
Ben, do you think, we talked about the Labour Party getting, it's a bit of a no-brainer. We hope we get a few seats at least, of course, being pragmatic. Do you think the worse it gets under Labour over the next 5 years, the better it is for us next time round?
Good question.
I think inevitably things are going to get worse before they get better. Last time Labour came to power, just talking about economics for a second, last time they came to office in 1997, they were handed a golden egg. The economy was in absolute tip-top condition. We weren't running a borrowing requirement, we were running a surplus. That hardly ever happens. And they managed to break the economy. This time they're inheriting a basket case of an economy because we've effectively been governed under Labour policies for the last 14 years. And I think this is Sean's view, and I endorse it. Even if they get a very large majority, you might have an election sooner than you think. Because they're likely to break the economy.
Do you think that's better, much better for us?
Well, then I think you come in. So the key here is reform gets seats now.
Yeah.
We stay the course, that there's no flaking off and going to the US or any nonsense like that. And we recognise... well, I'm just saying. And we recognise that the United Kingdom is where it's at, and we've got to just stay with it, yeah.
So, gentleman over there with the glasses, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Ben, when I was David, I was at Russian High Street giving out leaflets on Saturday morning. Great response. My question to you is, three of the people who are going to vote with reform were wobbling due to Nigel's supposed remarks on Ukraine. And so they say, we don't agree with what Nigel said about Ukraine. And all the Tory press now, they're blowing this out of proportion, aren't they? They're exaggerating. Do you think it'll blow over?
I think it will blow over. I mean, I hope and I think it will blow over. If people actually listen to what Nigel said, he didn't sympathise with Putin. He started off by saying he condemns the invasion of Ukraine, but he rightly pointed out some peculiar foreign policy moves by the European Union and NATO, which I was debating today. And one of the things, I mean, I don't want to get into a discussion on Ukraine. I mean, we can if you want to, but...
another time.
Yeah, another time. I mean, the great thing about Reform UK is we stand for British interests. That's what we care about. If you look at our contract with the people, it is all about domestic policy, with the exception of defence spending, which is increasing it to 2.5% and then to 3% as soon as we can do that. And I mean, defence actually ultimately is a domestic policy as well, because it's for the protection of the country. And what we would do unashamedly when it comes to Ukraine, the Middle East, Near East, Far East, any other intervention, would be to determine what is in the United Kingdom's interest to give these people £5 billion to fight a war. How do we make sure that the £5 billion we spend, or the troops that we put at risk of our own, are actually promoting British interests? And if I were to make a criticism about Ukraine at the moment, we can talk about the history, it's kind of academic, but if I was to make a criticism of our policy in Ukraine at the moment, is that we will do whatever Zelensky needs and wants. And that's not a good policy. What we need to be thinking is, what do we want out of Ukraine? What's beneficial for the UK? And we're not having that discussion. And any war prosecuted without knowing what your aim is a bad war to prosecute. We've done that many times before and we've regretted it.
Ben, can I ask, before I ask the audience, quite a different tangent. There was a recent poll which showed that something like 70% of people who were asked no longer feel that they can speak their mind in public. You know, they feel that they just simply don't have free speech anymore. This is something we've covered a lot on the channel. What is Reform's answer to that? I know that there is something on free speech, but what is it actually?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've got to get rid of this online safety bill for a start. We've got to ditch DEI. DEI is responsible. The regulatory framework for diversity, equality and inclusion, in my view, is very predominantly responsible for shutting down.
How are you going to frustrate that?
Well, you have to repeal. So everyone seems to think that you've got to pass a new law to get something done. Actually, what we need to do is start repealing lots of stuff that was done by Cameron.
It's not going to happen currently, is it? So how are we going to frustrate the rollout?
Can you?
Yeah, it's not going to happen currently, and it's not going to happen until you get a government which is controlled or dominated by Reform. It's not going to happen. But what you need to do is repeal the Equalities Act, which doesn't promote equality, repeal the regulatory framework, which pervades business, educational establishments, and every other institution in this country in the promotion of ethnic minorities, religious minorities, etc., 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 and go back to the fundamental principle on which I think everyone in this room was brought up, with the exception perhaps of my son and Dylan, that everyone is equal. You know, do you remember when we were children, institutionally, we had it drilled into us that everyone is equal. No one said that if you're from an ethnic minority, you need a leg up. Did you see the Criminal Sentencing Commission said the other day, a couple of months ago, that if you're from a troubled background, you should get a more lenient sentence. Now, the whole point about the criminal justice system is that it is utterly blind. That's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be fair without compassion. It's not meant to be compassionate. It's meant to deliver justice. If you break the law, you get apprehended, you get charged. If you're found guilty, you get convicted, and you get the due penalty. And this is how our society is being hijacked. So we've got to repeal all this nonsense. And one approach I have, by the way, is if we're in any doubt of what it is that needs repealing, we need to look at everything Tony Blair did and undo it. No. And we'll end up in a really good place.
No, that is, you might have seen David Starkey talking about this very thing. Recently, he talked about what he called a restoration with his particular historical language, which is that so much that was done has just simply got to be repealed.
That is so right. And Reform is not a misnomer, but we could equally be called the Restore Party. We've got to restore the United Kingdom to what it was. And we've got to be very careful, and my son's very good on this. Sorry, I keep referencing my son. But he's very good on this. He says, Daddy, you know, be careful of too much rapid reform. Restoration is, you know, we had a great system. Don't throw it away.
Jennifer. Yeah.
There's some confusion with people what the E in DEI stands for, because it doesn't actually stand for equality, it stands for equity, which is something else.
Right.
That means equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. And I think that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah.
People don't really grasp that.
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
I think that yes, exactly. That is. I think Ben's covered that. I think the problem is in some ways the Equality Act. If you have a situation like we had, where you have people equal before the law, and then you have an Equality Act which somehow supersedes it and gives people particular rights. They call them protected characteristics, right? That should be abolished. I mean, would reform abolish?
We would. It's in our contract with the people.
Right.
We would repeal the Equalities Act.
Right.
Yeah.
Next question. So, yeah, gentlemen.
Okay. I want to talk about something that we've touched upon, about reform cutting into natural Labour voters.
Yeah.
And sort of the affiliation with the right and ex-Tories, etc., is likely to alienate the traditional Labour voters. What I would say is that there is something there for reform by cutting across by simple things like raise that to 20,000 and also the other thing I thought we used it to be. But cutting into that Labour vote will be done on this basis because Labour does not represent working people anymore.
It doesn't.
And to take up your point about left-wing politics and why I flinch when everyone goes, oh, left-wing politics. The cultural movement that's going on now is not what I saw as traditional left-wing politics, which was coming from working class people from the bottom up. This is very much an elitist imposing from the academics, which has got nothing to do with ordinary working people.
Yeah, but that's actually, so, that is a recognised theory, if you like, which is that this is actually been a revolution from above. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Richard, I think, identifies the problem extremely well, but then he calls the Conservative Party the con-socialists. It's actually not about left and right. The debate no longer is about left and right. Left and right, I'm not right-wing. I actually think, I'm going to answer your question, but I actually think that if you're a politician in a democratic society, you cannot help but represent the interests of the working in the middle class. They are the predominant number of people in society. So you have to represent their interests. Otherwise, get off the playing field. And so I'm not right-wing. I squarely am looking at everything that I do promote with a view to promoting the working and middle class and creating the ability for aspiration to manifest itself in reality so that people can actually move across social barriers, enrich themselves, their children can do better. And the reason for that is because the human spirit needs to have ambition, and it needs to have the belief that it can fulfill its ambition. And what we've got is a uniparty in Parliament, which is top-down control, which sees its obligations to deliver global, this is the charitable interpretation, to deliver prosperity through the global prism, and that if they can do well for the globe, then the UK will automatically do well. But in their pursuit of global prosperity, they've turned their back on the British people, they've turned their back on nation states, they've turned their back on our culture, and what they've done, and I haven't discussed this, but it's crucial, is they have got into bed with big business. And big business has its own agenda. And people say to me, Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum is like the big guy who's, playing all the puppets. He may or may not be the chap who's playing the puppets, but I tell you what is utterly wrong, is the most powerful people in the world going to Davos, meeting the richest people in the world, behind closed doors, without any scrutiny on what is being discussed, and without any assessment of whether that meets, moral correctitude, if for want of a better description. And so one of our policies at Reform UK is to ban politicians from going to the World Economic Forum. That's on my leaflet. So what we're facing is not left versus right. We're facing this top-down, elitist, globalist, political class that's in bed with big business. If you want evidence of this, by the way, if you want evidence of what I've just said, go to Nick Clegg's Twitter page.
Do we have to?
I had a look at his Twitter for some reason today, and his pinned tweet at the top is that if we want to harness the power of AI, we have to do it in conjunction with big business. He's completely hijacked. And we see this, don't we? Because when they leave office, they all go and get cozy directorships in big business. They never get it in a small and medium-sized enterprise. You never see them working with the sole trader down the street. They go and work for Facebook, like he has, or they work for the Evening Standard, then they go on to BlackRock, or they work for Greensill, which went bankrupt, taking the country for a ride over coronavirus loans, or they work producing fictitious medical equipment, which never was delivered. Do you remember someone who moaned about this? And that's what they do. And sorry, I'm kind of rabbiting on, but you're right, basically.
Yes, sir. Sorry, this gentleman's been asking. Yeah, you there at the back.
I was wondering, a friend to it, which you said earlier on, is about young people looking to vote for the Conservative selection. I think we've seen that in recent European votes, where a lot of young people voted for the populist movement there. And I think something which will happen in the coming Labour government, which is going to affect young people massively and ought to be hammered, is housing. And they're likely to ever be able to own their own house, as well as the debt which is at the and they're not seeing a way out of that. Unless that would resonate with young people.
Yeah, so, I mean, Mike, one of the greatest shames about the election being called early is that in producing the contract with the people, which, by the way, has lots of really good policies for young people in it, we didn't have the time, or Richard forgot, because I did ask him, to put in, to put in a page which pulls all the really good policies for young people into one page. And housing is a critical component of it. But if you look at what our policies are, you cut back immigration, demand for housing goes down. You get rid of we expressly say we want to deregulate planning. That allows the construction of housing and the rehabilitation. And rehabilitation is critical. I look around Wellingborough Town Centre, Rushden, you know, we must rehabilitate properties before we go out and build new stuff on green fields. We're, again, taking the knee to big business when we build on green fields because it's easy for big business to put a box up. But there's a wonderful post office on, is it Midland Street? Just Midland Road. Wonderful post office. They're going to tear it down. I mean, talk about damage to our cultural heritage. That facade needs to be protected and it needs to be turned into a block of flats. They're going to knock it down and turn it into a block of flats. And the other thing we've got to do, which by the way helps housing, is get rid of net zero. Because net zero requires every house to be built to the ultimate standard in carbon emission output. So it's so insulated, it's incredibly expensive to create. And then, you know, by the way, some of these modern houses now suffer mold because they've got no draft, they've got no air going through them. And if we got rid of net zero, we'd be able to bring these properties back into use. Net zero prohibits using properties in the town centre of Wellingborough. This hotel will be condemned by net zero. It's incapable of meeting the standards net zero will require, which, by the way, as I'm sure you know if you've heard me speak before, is that by 2027, you have to have an energy performance certificate rating of C. And do you know what happens to you if you try and sell your home or lease your home in 2027 and you haven't got that rating? Do you know what happens? Hands up. It's a £15,000 fine and up to 12 months in prison.
Originates in Europe.
Yeah.
That's a European regulation.
Absolutely. So this wonderful hotel, which dates back to the 17th century, this wonderful hotel will be incapable of being sold or leased in 2027 unless it pulls itself up by the bootstrap somehow. And by 2030, the requirement is to be an EPC rating of B. Net zero is madness.
Does that only apply if you're selling something?
If you're selling or leasing. You can stay in, but what does it do to the value of a property if you can never sell it? It kills it. And then let's go to the next step. I just want to take this one step further. When you require that level of investment in a property to make it usable, you then have to have the ability to charge a higher rent, right? And what do you think, where do you think the highest rents can be levied? They're not levied across all the parts of the country that need levelling up. The highest rents can be levied in Mayfair, City of London, some parts of Birmingham, some parts of Edinburgh, perhaps Manchester, but not round the United Kingdom. So when we aim and we pivot and we drive at this net zero, we are undermining our ability to level up. We are stripping away jobs and prosperity from urban England. And this net zero is a one-size-fits-all policy not made in the United Kingdom, made by the Paris Accord with a bunch of idiots sitting around a table thinking what's good for the globe. And we signed up to it as a country which is actually already very good, if I can use good as a descriptor here, very good on carbon emissions. We produce less than 1% of the carbon emissions of the world. For us to decarbonize from this very low level at which we're at is extremely demanding. It is economic emasculation. It's much easier for China to make improvements on decarbonizing because it's producing a shed load of carbon. It's much easier for India to decarbonize because they're producing a shed load of carbon. Yet we have taken on the obligation, and when you hear our politicians speak, those idiots that I shared a platform with last night, they will say, we must lead the way. Why the hell must we lead the way? We are already up the curve. And it's going to damage Wellingborough. It's going to damage Rushden. It's going to damage Northampton. Anyway, I've gone on enough.
One quick question for you. Do you think there's any prospect that the Labour government does it, they'll weaponise the council tax to try and punish people?
To what? To
punish them, basically. You know, weaponise the council tax to punish people who don't do certain things, with their homes.
They're going to put council tax up whatever. They are going to put Wellingborough, the North Northamptonshire District Council hasn't produced accounts for 3 years since it was formed. The Wellingborough Borough Council was actually quite a profitable council. It had good assets, good income. I had a look at it. They merged it with a whole load of failing councils, produced Northamptonshire, and since it was produced as an entity, it hasn't met its statutory obligation to produce accounts on an annual basis. Yet, it has increased council tax by the maximum 4.99% every single year. Northamptonshire is bust. The reason you can't see clearly when you get to a roundabout, have you noticed that? You can't see on traffic coming from the right, on just about every single flipping roundabout around Wellingborough, Rushden, Irthlingborough and so on, is because the borough hasn't got enough money to cut back the hedgerows. So you can't see the traffic. And the potholes, they're symptomatic of a bust borough. That's what's going on. And Jen Kitchen, for all her everyone wants to talk about potholes. You know, I get told you come from Fulham in London, you haven't got a clue about, what's going on in Wellingborough and Rushden. She hasn't got a flipping clue what's going on in Wellingborough and Rushden. She talks about fixing the potholes. She doesn't realise that her first thing that she needs to do, and she's had an opportunity now because she's been the MP, is march into the district council's office, get the guy who runs the finances by the scruff of the neck, drag him out and say, where are you spending our bloody money?
Ben, can I ask you, you've been speaking about net zero. I want to ask you about net zero in another context entirely. And that is that reform, Nigel has said that this is the immigration election. Reform had a policy which was called net zero migration. And then there is also this other part of the policy which is a freeze on migration. My perception is that the net zero part of it has been downplayed a bit lately. Can you clarify for us what is the actual immigration policy for reform? Because this is crucial to why so many people would want to vote for you.
Yeah, so
I'd say it's the number one.
Yeah, it is, and it's where I started my talk, the assault on the British culture. And so we have to dramatically scale back immigration. And I think the net zero immigration line was a play on words used by Richard because it kind of played well with net zero, you know, as a environmental policy. But effectively what Richard, the policy, there are two legs to our policy. The first is that we will cut back immigration dramatically, full stop. And we will ensure that the only immigrants who come to this country are immigrants who have something to genuinely add to the intellectual and cultural fabric of this country. That we're not importing, as we are at the moment, cheap, unskilled labour, students who are doing Mickey Mouse degrees, bringing their dependents with them, people who are coming on short-term work visas, bringing their dependents and never leaving. All of that will stop, and it will be legislated against, so it will just stop. And that will allow, apart from anything else, wages to grow and for British people to get a fair wage, etc., which combined with the increase in the threshold of tax will make it much more beneficial for people to come off benefits and go back into the workforce. You can see how this all holistically pulls together. Are you with me?
Yes.
And so that's one policy. And then the other policy, which is a drive to get those who've immigrated here to emigrate, is a taxation on employers who employ foreigners. And that there would be a 6.2% surcharge on employers' taxation, so that the cost of employing a foreigner would go up by 6.2%. And there are 2.9 million foreigners working in the United Kingdom that would be subject to this policy. It excludes those in the NHS because we don't want to put any more pressure on the NHS right now. But the 2.9 million people employed by companies in this country, those employers will be subject to an additional 6.2% tax, which should incentivize them to not employ foreigners, but employ, Brits.
So is it with the net zero, you said that was a kind of, just a fanciful name for it, but it was quite specifically said 1 in, 1 out. Now, to me, then,
we need to be more dramatic than that.
Need to be more dramatic, but you were talking about culture. 1 in, 1 out looks at things entirely economically. It doesn't look at who's coming in and who's leaving. And that, to me, is the crucial point. 400,000 in and 400,000 out is actually net zero migration. But I mean, I'm assuming you wouldn't think that was satisfactory.
No, in a practical sense, 1.4 million people came in last year, gross. 150,000 Brits roughly left. And then those who'd immigrated to this country before, about 400,000 of them left. So the net figure was 750,000. But we are experiencing, your point is absolutely spot on, Peter. We are experiencing a brain drain, an emigration of Brits who are fed up with the high levels of taxation, fed up with the direction of travel of the country, and want to go and earn and have an aspirational life. This is why aspiration is so critical, because you've got to wake up every morning wanting to be alive and go forth. So, we will dramatically cut back immigration, and we would try and, through all our other policies, make the United Kingdom.
Where does the freeze come in then? Nigel's been saying we need to freeze migration. He's been saying this. Where does that?
So the word freeze was the subject of some debate on our WhatsApp group, the shadow cabinet or whatever we call ourselves. And it basically means net zero. When he says freeze, what he means is net zero, frozen.
Right, I see. We've got time for 2 more points, actually, because Ben's got to rush back to London. He's actually come here especially for us tonight. Just 2 people, 2 people who haven't actually spoken maybe yet. This gentleman here, and then is there anyone over this side? No? You all expended? Okay, this gentleman here.
Yeah, Ben, you focused on legal migration there, but what about illegal migration? What are your plans for stopping boats, and what are your plans for deporting those who are already here?
Yeah, so let's just deal with deportations. That's complex because you have people here of whom we don't know their origin because they threw their papers away as they arrived. And if we do know their origin, we don't have a deportation treaty with their country. So, for example, we've got no ability to deport Afghanis. There's nowhere to send them if they've got here illegally. And that is the problem with the entire British government approach to stopping the boats. They see it through a prism of deportation. And deportation actually is what happens when border control has failed. And what the entire Western world has forgotten, it's a really good point, what the entire Western world has forgotten is borders need physical enforcement. I mean, what happens if you try, and I can tell you this because I'm half Pakistani, if you try and cross from India to Pakistan, it's the surest and quickest way to get a bullet in your head. They will not tolerate it. And what we've become so politically weak in this country, we're not prepared to enforce our borders. And by the way, it's the same across all Western democracies, including the US. They're not prepared to enforce the Mexican border in the US. 2 million people enter the United States of America illegally every year. 350,000 people enter the European Union illegally every year. And the reason they are so at liberty in Europe is because Europe also has turned its back on nation states, and there are no borders in Europe. You are aware of the Schengen zone, which is sold, forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but it's sold to the young of the world, including young Brits, as a great thing because you can have a cappuccino in Rome at 9 a.m., you can have lunch in Paris, and then you can go to Munich if you're inclined to go to Munich, and have supper in Munich, and you won't once have to show your passport. But the expense involved in doing that, apart from the monetary expense of traveling so much in one day, is the nation states. And so when you get into Italy or the Balkans or Greece as an illegal migrant, you're free to travel straight to Calais. You can go wherever you want. But I'll tell you what's really interesting. Very few, close to none, go to Poland. None. None go to Hungary because they know they're not welcome. They won't get any benefits. They'll be arrested. They'll be put in jail. But we are so weak. And what we need to... So our policy is... our policy is stop the boats in the channel, require the boats to turn round, and if they don't turn round, take them back to France. And if the French Navy have an issue with us, we have a fight with the French Navy. And that is standing, and the people I shared the panel with last night would go, oh, you can't, that's an unrealistic policy. Why is it unrealistic? Why is that unrealistic? If the French are escorting these bloody dinghies to the point of our territorial water, we need to challenge the French.
We haven't got a navy. We sold our navy down.
Well, I mean, we certainly haven't got a border force because the border force is acting like a border taxi service. It's aiding, what's happening is the French Navy is aiding and abetting people smuggling. Border Force and RNLI, if anyone is donating to RNLI, stop it. They are aiding and abetting criminal gangs. That's what's happening. I mean, the criminal gangs must be laughing because they think, we get them to the beach at Calais and then we're done. The British and the French Navy will look after us, look after our trade. It's absolutely absurd. And the other thing that we do in this country is that we spend £50,000 per head per annum on illegal migrants. £50,000 per head per annum. You would have to earn a salary of £100,000 a year in this country to be able to net that amount. 100,000 a year. How much do you think the French spend on these illegal migrants?
Tent. Enough to buy them a tent.
Yeah, £5,000 a year. So if you're an illegal migrant in France, you're bound to want to come to the United Kingdom. So we've got to stop the boats. And the other thing we're going to do, and I didn't want to say it earlier because I think we need to do this with or without the boats, is ditch the European Court of Human Rights. I mean, they have to go for a multitude of reasons, which I won't bore you with unless you want to be bored by them. But they have to go.
Can I just say, Ben, I'm still on the doorstep. I still find it difficult now to be crystal clear about immigration. I know Richard said keep it simple, and I'll have to because I'm a simple soul. But if I got into the level of detail that Peter's just raised with himself, I'd be thinking we're a little bit, it's not wishy-washy, but I'm not absolutely crystal clear. You know, I think net zero was probably an unfortunate phrase in my view, and I would like to have a little more clarity about exactly what I can say and what I should say, and what we're actually purported to, you know, what we can realistically implement as well.
Yeah,
I think it's a very fair point.
Yeah,
I think it's a fair point.
And your point is very fair. We've got to look at gross numbers. We've got to target gross numbers. And actually what we want is close to zero gross numbers. And what we should really be targeting, and this has been, what we should really be targeting is net emigration, but not of Brits. That's what we need.
Yes, exactly. I think, interestingly, over about the past 20 years or so, about 66%, two-thirds of the country want immigration to be either reduced or drastically reduced. But a recent poll showed that amongst Conservative voters, 51% wanted an complete halt, which is the New Culture Forum's position.
And SDP's position.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It is indeed.
Yeah. So round of applause for SDP.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that that's just a right time in which to stop. You know, Ben's campaigning all the time. It's great that he's actually been here to talk to us. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you.
I would also add, by the way, that you might know that we had 10 pledges in the New Culture Forum that we put forward to all the candidates in the Conservative Party, in Reform and the SDP. These 10 pledges, which you can see on our website or whatever, include ones on immigration, whatever. I'm very pleased to say that actually we've had a great response, particularly from Reform, saying yes, 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 we agree to all of these. And I believe you endorsed them as well, didn't you, at the very beginning, Ben? That's the background, if you like, to what we're doing. But again, Ben, I think something very special might be happening here. And I want to wish you the very, very best for next Thursday.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, and actually for the engagement of your questions. I think it's really, really worthwhile. Thank you very much indeed, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.